Hello to all you people out there in radio podcast land, and welcome to the 11th episode of Comic DNA. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Sam and Max, Freelance Police, written and drawn by Steve Purcell. I'm Aaron Walther, and with me today, as always, is Luke Thompson-Moritz.
Thank you, hello.
And on today's episode, we have special guest, Luke's cousin, I believe.
Yes.
Anthony Comito.
Hi.
Anthony, thank you for being with us. And if I am led to understand it correctly, you make YouTube videos, Anthony?
Yes.
Yes. Before we get started on the podcast, why don't you go ahead and just kind of give us a brief explanation of what you do?
So basically, on YouTube, I make little short films, I guess. I've only done a few videos, and we're not really that big of a channel, but we're slowly but surely growing, I guess.
Sounds a lot like our podcast.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure we put the link to the YouTube channel, and we'll have it at the end of the podcast too. So, as I said, today we're talking about Sam and Max. The book we're reading is Sam and Max Surfin the Highway, and this book was first published in 1995, I think, by Marlowe Company, and it is a collection of the Sam and Max comics that had been put out by various publishers since 1987 when it first started. So, Sam and Max, it is the brainchild of cartoonist Steve Purcell. The characters originally started as a comic strip he produced for a college newsletter in the early 80s, I think like 80, 82, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And after graduation, Purcell started getting freelance work from Marvel Comics and some other indie publishers, and he eventually turned Sam and Max into a full-length comic and started actually producing full issue stories about the characters. In 1988, Purcell was hired by LucasArts as an animator, and he eventually started using the characters of Sam and Max in the LucasArts quarterly newsletter, which led to their own game, Sam and Max Hit the Road. And that I think that is what really sparked a lot of Sam and Max's dedicated fan base.
Definitely,
that game success.
Yeah. It came right off the heels of the success of Monkey Island, the notorious point-and-click adventure game. So they needed new characters for a new a new engine that they were developing. They needed new characters to make another point-and-click adventure game, and there became Sam and Max Hit the Road.
Okay, yeah, and then they made some sequel games after that, and Sam and Max was turned into a Saturday morning TV cartoon show in 1998. Which ran for a season, and then it was revived as a webcomic in 2005. So Sam and Max is kind of like a little like multimedia franchise. It kind of done a little bit of everything. But like I said, so for this episode, we are reading Surfin the Highway, which is the old original Sam and Max comics. Luke, why don't you give us since the book is a collection of various stories, short stories of various length, why don't you kind of just give us a description of the series as a whole? Who are the characters and what is it, the style, and what is it about?
The best way to describe Sam and Max is I feel like it's a parody of detective film noir sort of things, just
absolutely
very, very amplified on the goofy scale. They're always Sam is always cracking wisecracks, and Max is just insane, and seeing their dynamic, and it's mostly just the series is about the stories of their hijinks as they get roped up into things far bigger than they could have ever imagined.
Yeah, there's like a surreal quality to the storytelling. There's
always a sort of science fiction element barely sprinkled into the stories.
Yeah, it's just really, I don't even know if you can't really even call it science fiction. It really does. I thought what I found interesting was when I was reading the comic, I should say, before we get going, this is the first episode where this is not a comic that I picked out for us to do. This was Anthony brought this comic to us.
Yes.
And I'm familiar with Sam and Max. I actually had read some of the webcomic when that came back, or when that started up in 2005. Right. So I'm familiar with them, but I had never read these books this book particularly, and I haven't played any of the games.
Which is interesting because I feel like each one of us kind of bring something to the table as far as being a fan of Sam and Max, because I primarily played the games.
Right.
The Telltale point-and-click adventure games and everything after that.
Mm-hmm.
And Anthony, I believe you've read the comics.
I've read
often.
the comics, I've played the games, I've watched the series, but I gotta say, out of all the multimedia, like, interpretations, I guess, of Sam and Max, the comics have always been the best, like, I guess, versions of them.
Right.
But if I had to say, like, the one thing that came closest to the comics in terms of how the characters acted and their whole dynamic and all that, the original LucasArts point-and-click adventure game, Hit the Road.
Okay. I have not actually played that. I primarily played the Telltale point-and-click games. That's where I'm the most familiar with them. And, like, the Poker Night games from Telltale.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, just pretty much everything that Telltale's done that they had a hand in, I've played.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is. This was an interesting book because it was something that I actually had not read before doing the podcast. So I of course I did really like it. It is a really good book. Purcell has a really, really good comedic style in his comics, and
definitely
the comedy is really strong. But what I really like is how irreverent the plots are. Like, they just sort of move along almost like it's a free thought. Like they don't really follow any structure. They just kind of like move. A thing happens and then a thing happens and a thing happens, and it's all pretty unconnected. And It's just a lot of like I hesitate to use the word random because that's such a catch-all, but it really is.
Word sort of
it is. But it really has this quality of like anything goes, almost like a Saturday morning cartoon, which is why it's really obvious how easily it fit into a Saturday morning cartoon. But it definitely had like a Looney Tunes, or even in the older Disney stuff, like the older Mickey Mouse comics, like from the 30s and 40s. It definitely has a quality like that.
There was a lot of points too where the thing that I first noticed how irrelevant the plot was to a degree was like when they did the scene transitions from like one scene to another, and it starts off and it's well, we're in Egypt now, or something like that, or specifically where they go to the moon and they go, well, we're on the moon now, and their car's on the moon and everything, just really goofy, funny stuff like that. So that's when I very, very strongly noticed that the plot wasn't really what's going to speak for the book. It's going to be the dialogue.
One thing that really spoke for me in the book is the way the art quality is.
Yes.
The art style, I mean. Every time I read this book, I notice something new with it. One of the stronger points of this book to me, like in terms of the art, is a lot of the humor, in my opinion, comes from the art because, like in scenes where they're just walking around the city, there's like, it looks just so grimy and disgusting and like...
It does.
Yeah.
It's just like gross.
Purcell really fills his page,
Definitely.
Which I really like that. There's always like little things going on in the background, and that's a real like a real I don't know how to say it, like a specific type of, like, that's a real cartoonisty thing to do, where there's just it makes a page feel really animated because there's always something going on. Like, even if it's two characters standing there talking, there's little jokes in the background. There's like some of his recurring motifs are the cockroaches running around, or rats, and so there's always like every page has like little jokes here and there.
It's especially funny that Sam and Max don't even remotely notice the things going on. Like, there could have even been a page where they could have been talking to each other, and he could have had like Max like looking off into the distance as he's talking at one of these background elements, but they're so desensitized to it just because of the way he built the characters, and that for me was really funny on another level as well.
That's something I never really thought about, but you're completely right about that.
They're such goofy characters, but in comparison to like what else is going on in the world, they're kind of I struggle to say normal because that's very, very far from the truth.
Maybe the word you're looking for is reserved.
Yeah, that's a good word, reserved. They're reserved, especially in comparison to what's going on around them. There shouldn't be giant cockroaches. There shouldn't be blah blah blah, but it works because Purcell knows what's important.
I think it works because it's just it's a cartoon world. And it's a very self-aware comic. Like, they do a really good job of breaking the fourth wall, I think.
and they don't
definitely.
overdo it. Which
Yeah,
is really
exactly.
nice.
Well, what I like is that they don't break the fourth wall to like always just talk at the viewer. They break the fourth wall when they acknowledge that like it's a comic book.
Yeah.
My favorite joke, probably right away. Like I enjoyed the book, but I was really hooked right away when in the first story.
About the Philippines?
And they have to go to the Philippines.
Yep, I was just about to mention that.
Yeah,
Drawn without reference, apparently, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
That panel like knocked me on my ass. Like
Yeah.
I love that. Like that to me, when I saw that panel, I knew exactly what I was getting in for. You know, they're going on their mission and it's just a quick cut. Like it's in one panel, they're in their office, and the next panel it's just here we are in the Philippines.
Right.
And Max
like
says drawn without reference material apparently, and it's just
like in front of like some like Incan temple or something.
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. It
Something
doesn't look
completely
anything
ridiculous.
Yeah, just all random, like cobbled together, like quote foreign styles.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that is such a good joke.
And when I was flipping through the book a few minutes ago, I noticed in like one of the panels, like you can see like Egyptian pyramids in the background of this scene that's supposed to take place in the Philippines, and I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah, like, you know, how we were saying the dialogue speaks very well through this book, but it's nice that it's so timeless, like it is, you know, like you said, you find something new every time you read it.
Definitely.
Because for me, the first time I was reading it, I was focused on the dialogue, because when I'm familiar with Sam and Max, I knew that the dialogue was really funny, the jokes that Sam does are very funny, and so on and so forth. So reading through it again, I'm excited to see what I missed the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very, like you said, Purcell has that style to him, and I'm excited to read it again.
That's really one thing the game's never really captured, though, is the way the environments are done. Like, sure, Sam and Max are in a city or whatever, but it's not gross looking, and there's not like hidden stuff like there is in the books.
It's got the dialogue like the games.
Definitely.
But it does. You're right. It doesn't capture those. Just from what I've played, I can attest to that.
Yeah, there's a good. I really like the story "Fair Wind to Java," and that starts off in the bar.
Is that with the alien?
Is that?
Or is that one of the colored ones towards the end?
No. That's the one where they go to ancient Egypt.
Okay.
Yes.
But it starts off with them in the bar, and if you look at this first big panel, like they're in a bar, and there's so much going on in the panel. There's like a picture of the Pillsbury Doughboy on the wall, and if you actually like there's a lot of references going on. So Sam and Max are standing there talking. The bartender is Tom Cruise from the movie Cocktail. And there's also the villain from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I think it looks like Lon Chaney standing next to him, and then Jesus Christ in the background.
Of course.
So there's just like all kinds of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that's in this comic. It's just that's just all background stuff, you know.
It's almost like a reward for like reading it again, or you know, being able to pick up on it the first time, because like I said, I focused on the dialogue, so I wouldn't have noticed something like that.
Right.
So.
Well, and it's also one of those things where, like, when you first read in the comic, you may not necessarily get the reference, because he certainly doesn't, like, there's no, like, he doesn't draw attention to any of these
He doesn't
references.
throw it in your face.
It's all very subtle.
Yeah, it's all very subtle, but there's a day when you're going to be, like, flipping through cable, and you're going to see that stupid Tom Cruise movie where he's a bartender, and then, like, later you'll read through this comic again, and you're going to be like, oh my god, that's Tom Cruise.
That really is him, right.
I didn't get that the first 12 times I read the book. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff like that in the comic, which I really liked. I also really liked in the I think it was the ancient Egypt one, when the drawn without reference material. I love how that joke came back later on when they went somewhere and he drew it all correctly, and Max said painstakingly rendered with correct reference or something to that effect.
I think that was the Egypt one.
That was the Egypt one.
And
yeah.
Right after that, the aliens come out of the pyramid.
Here we are in ancient Egypt, and he says sensitively rendered only after painstaking research, no doubt.
Right.
Yeah. So that joke came back in a really good way.
And like you said, they do a good job of breaking the fourth wall, so it's not thrown in your face. You know, it's not like Deadpool making fun of the reader or something. It's just those little tiny things. There was a specific scene where Sam was saying something. He was just speaking dialogue, and Max says, "Hey, your dialogues or your speech bubbles in the way,
blocking my vision, right?"
Yeah, blocking my vision.
Sam's dialogue was so big it was like covering up half of Max, and Max's little dialogue just says, "Your speech bubble is blocking my vision." Yeah, that was good.
Stuff like that. Like that's when I knew, okay, I know what I'm in for now. I'm ready for it. Because I had this preconceived notion of what I thought Sam and Max was, and this blew it out of the water, obviously.
Like, one thing, to go back to the Egypt thing, like,
Yeah.
in terms of breaking the fourth wall, like, you know, I'm actually looking at the panel right now. It says, oh, well, here we are in ancient Egypt. Max says that, and then Sam says, sensitively rendered only after painstaking research, no doubt. But then the thing is, it's very quick when he says this, because, like, Max immediately just interrupts him and shuts him up, and it's not drawn out. And that's one of the big strengths of the book, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, since the jokes are so quick and just there are a bunch of one-liners, it's, you know, we don't really get tired of them, which is what I'm really glad of, because they do those scene transition things and make note of them almost every time. But I still laughed every time. I chuckled. You know, there's always something very tiny about it, like with this one, how they reference the last place that they went to looked nothing like what it really looked like, and when they're on the moon, his car's on the moon for some reason. Like, every time that he just did something very tiny and subtle to make it feel fresh again.
One of the things that this comic does, that like Purcell's cartooning style does, which really, I think, really contributes to the surreal nature I was talking about, but also contributes to the fast pace of, like, all the stories move really fast and there's lots of jokes, is that a lot of the panels, there's not actually a lot of panel to panel continuity. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times the panels are jumping from one scene to the next. There's not a lot of, like, when the characters are talking, usually it's just within one panel, and then the next panel they're off doing something else.
Right.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of, like, the continuity between the panels doesn't, like, directly link to each other. The comics, like, really speed up time by jumping forward all over the place, which makes like the pace of the story really fly. And
it went really fast.
I completely see that now. I'm, like, flipping through the book as you're saying all this, and I definitely...
Yeah, like, a lot of the panels aren't actually connected to each other. I think the average page in this book, you could look at it, and if you didn't read it, like, if you were just looking at the page, it would look like 4 panels that have nothing to do with each other, except that they occasionally have Sam and Max in the panels. You know what I mean? But, like, it almost looks like a clip art comic. Like, you could just take a bunch of random panels, rearrange them, and then just, like, change the dialogue to fit, like, the story you wanted to tell, and it could still work.
Right, which is impressive.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's so easy. It's just, he built it in a way where he can just kind of, you know, I'm going to put Sam and Max in Egypt.
Right.
I'm going to put Sam and Max on the moon.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to do this. And it works. And it's impressive to me because Steve Purcell knows, like, what the Sam and Max readers want. You know, they don't care about what's going on necessarily. They just want to know what kind of hijinks Sam and Max are getting into and what they're going to say to each other.
Well, I actually would just say that it's more like that's just the type of comics he wants to tell.
Right.
Like, that's the kind of comics he just wants to make. Had you seen? I saw an interview with Steve Purcell. I watched an interview, and, like, after we decided to do this book, I pretty much immersed myself in Sam and Max, and I saw an interview with Purcell where he was talking about the origin of the characters. Anthony, are you familiar with this?
No, I haven't seen this interview.
Well, okay. It was dumb of me to ask because I didn't explain what it is. So I saw an interview where he explained the origin of the characters, where he said that they were actually created by his younger brother.
Oh, actually, I do know this story.
So you are familiar with this, yeah.
Yep.
So
didn't his brother sign the rights to him, like, on his birthday or something?
Yeah, he like bought the rights to the characters, but basically, as I understand it, like, his brother would create these characters, which was the detective dog and his rabbit sidekick, and he was like a kid when he did this, and they would make these comics, and his brother would leave them unfinished, and so Steve would then finish the comics by, like, going in and, like, basically making fun of his brother by making it like a wacky, stupid comic.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
His brother wanted it to be like a real comic, you know, like a
real detective,
like a real
comic.
noir comic.
Yeah, a real noir comic, but like a real cartoon noir comic. But
right.
But Steve would then go in and, like, make fun of the characters, like, have them forget each other's names, and he would just do, like, a parody of, like, what a little kid thinks a comic is. That's how he describes it.
Yeah.
And that to me is, like, basically all you need to know about the comic as far as I'm concerned, because that's exactly what the comic reads like.
100%.
It reads Well, because when I was first reading it, I read it before I saw that interview, and I was reading through these, and I felt like it was drawn and written by two different people, and it felt like somebody drew a comic, and they were like, okay, here's the basic story, like here's the mission or whatever, and then somebody else went in having no idea what the comic was about and just started writing dialogue, just whatever they wanted.
I could totally see that.
There's a lot of like of the whole here we are and whatever, and then there's a lot of quote random. I know I'm going back to the random well again, but there's a lot of panels where like such and such will happen, and like Sam will be like, oh, then this happened, and then there's a dialogue bubble for Max, and what Max says has nothing to do with anything. It's just like, and that's the joke. The joke is that it's just a non sequitur reference to something, or just a complete random thing that he just blurts out.
Done well.
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously it's done well, but that's why I say it really felt like it really felt almost like an art house comic, where like two people agreed to create a comic without ever talking to each other,
which is hilarious.
Right.
Right. That's part of the charm too. Yeah.
Right. So I had this idea where I was like, this is such a weird comic, and then I saw the interview, and I was just like, oh, that makes perfect sense that he would do that. And then that's his style of comedy. Like he's purposely making the characters dumb and naive to their surroundings. And that's the comedy, because it's just simple, and like they're simple, endearing characters. And I think it really works. Obviously, I'm not the only one who thinks so, because it's a fairly successul franchise.
Yeah,
right. It's obviously had quite its fair share of success, even after the comic.
Yeah, Sam and Max doesn't need my praise. They've been getting along just fine before I read the book.
Right. The fact of the matter is, they're still relevant today. Mm-hmm. 20 plus or 25 plus years later, they're still being put in things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and they're still coming up with new funny material for them. That's so impressive. I don't know how much dialogue or anything, because they're, like I said, they're in the Telltale poker night games where they're playing poker with other characters.
Yeah.
I don't know if Steve Purcell had much to do with that, but case in point, it still feels like Sam and Max. Like, they're still so well built that from the outside, it still makes me go, oh, yep, that's totally something Sam would say.
Yeah, from what I know
totally
about
something Max.
From what I know about Telltale and how they make the Sam and Max games, I don't think Steve Purcell actually wrote any of the material for them, but he did, help with the character design and all that. But yeah, Telltale does a pretty good job at kind of replicating the dialogue. But to me, like the whole thing with the comic being like almost a parody of how kids would make comics, it's something that can't be replicated, like not even in any other medium. Because the animated series, even it's not like the book.
Correct. That was something I was going to bring up, because I know, like Luke, you were talking about playing the games, and I just went through the animated series too, and I did enjoy the cartoon.
It's definitely good.
Yeah,
a bit toned down, but it's good.
It is toned down. I had like completely missed the cartoon. I guess it just came out at that time when it was probably just a few years after my time, but. I, as a kid, I really, really enjoyed Freakazoid and The Tick and the Earthworm Jim cartoon. And The Tick especially has been – I've never hid the fact that The Tick is one of the biggest influence on me and my comedy writing, specifically with like the comedy superhero stuff I do in Zero's Heroes. I feel like it's hack work how much I've been influenced by The Tick. But
oh yeah, definitely. Like The Tick and Sam and Max specifically, they've both influenced me on some stuff I'm going to be putting out soon. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I watched Sam and Max, and I was like, how did I not like see this or get this? Because it was right up my alley. Like, as somebody who was like obsessed with The Tick and Freakazoid, and Sam and Max is like exactly like that kind of cartoon. Even down to the fact that like it has that like jazzy swing intro, which is like what all those shows had.
Yeah.
It really was like a lot like the show, but I think it did a good job. It still like felt Sam and Max. Like it was still like it was a bit more irreverent and surreal, like in its storytelling, a bit more almost Looney Tunes-y cartoon than The Tick.
It's a lot more over the top than the comics in a way, like in the way that they have like all these different gadgets and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a thing that they had to do, like
because
in the
they
comic,
can't like have guns and stuff like
yeah,
that.
exactly. In the
I think
comic,
the show aired on Fox Kids, right?
yeah, it was Fox Kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the comic, yeah, they had guns, like, and that was a good joke. Sam had the ridiculously oversized
revolver,
45 revolver, yeah,
which is amazing.
yeah, and I like that Max always has the Luger.
The Luger,
and that's a good joke too, like, because again, talking about the like surreal nature of the comic and how like there's no like panel to panel continuity and it feels like it's thrown together by different people who never talk to each other. Like, they do a good joke where, like, one panel they're standing there, and the next panel Sam's got a Luger, the next panel Max has a Luger, and then there's a dialogue from Sam where he's like, "Where did you get that Luger?" And Max is like, "Don't ask me." Like,
right, like, where do you keep that?
Yeah, where do you keep that? Yeah, and that's a good recurring joke too.
Yeah, that's even in the games too. Like, that's all the way even in like the Devil's Playhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Then the newest.
It's
Sam
like the
Max
big
game.
recurring joke of the series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good recurring joke.
Oh, it's funny. It's always funny.
Especially because Max, like, by no circumstance whatsoever would I ever trust Max to handle a firearm.
Yeah.
Like, Sam, okay, that's a little more believable, but Max, like, he shouldn't have that. That's kind of another thing too, of like, it feels like there's some panels where like Sam was kind of thinking, where did you get that and how? Like, how did you get that? Why do you have that?
Right. Yeah, in the cartoon, they obviously they couldn't have guns, but they still did a good job, I think, of kind of like keeping the like cartoon violence pretty high. They just didn't let them have real guns, but they would have like fake guns or like they would pull out various kinds of. It's like the whole like
launchers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the whole like you can have them throwing bombs and grenades and shooting lasers at each other, but they can't have a real looking gun.
Yeah,
which that's the problem with every cartoon, I think.
Especially in the 90s.
Well, the 90s were so censorship heavy. Like that was the decade of won't somebody think of the children. After G.I. Joe and Transformers and Ninja Turtles in the 80s, in the 90s everybody freaked out about kids and violence. So there was the 90s, you guys wouldn't remember this, but that's when they instituted like the TV rating system. I remember when like I used to just watch TV, and then one day all of a sudden it was in the news. It was a big deal. Suddenly TV shows had a little ratings box in the corner when it would start. Like all the cartoons were like TVY or TVY7, and I remember that very clearly because I thought it was really stupid. And also the cartoons I watched all made fun of it. Freakazoid did like a joke about like the censor, and I think Tiny Toons did too. The 90s definitely were like the paranoid, overprotective, won't somebody think of the children censor decade. I think things have laxed like
big time.
It's less about the violence now, more about like drug use and escalating things like that. But it's funny too that Sam and Max, like, the guns are kind of like you were saying, they did a good job of getting around that because like they almost feel just kind of like a costume piece more than anything. Like they bring it out just to intimidate, but it's like they could get by without it.
Well, that's the thing. Like in the comic, Sam's like giant revolver. It's not a real gun. It's ridiculously huge. It's
got this
a cartoon
elasticity to it too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's drawn. Yeah, like it's made of rubber. Like that's the style.
And there's always like a rat in it or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
like the barrel.
It's a cartoon world, and that's the kind of thing that like would have appeared in a Mickey Mouse cartoon.
Yeah,
right.
In an old Mickey Mouse cartoon. You can see those. They have guns in them. But like,
wow.
Yeah, they
exist.
And now, or I should say, in the 90s when they were making that cartoon, it just wouldn't fly. And I guess I'm a little disappointed, but at the same time, they were able to deal with it, I think, fairly well.
Yeah. I think that even though they changed, the guns or whatever, I think the general like feel of the humor was still there in the show.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I also really liked. Actually, I thought the show did a good job of kind of it added the characters that it added.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
The geek, like the character, she was fine. She felt very like Saturday morning cartoon, like have a kid character and also have a girl because there's no Sam and Max, which is fine. That character's fine. But I really really loved the Lorne, the friend
the friend for life.
Yeah, that character was really funny. Reminded me a lot of Fanboy, the character from Freakazoid. just somebody who's just obsessed with the main characters. But they did a really good job with that character. I actually might have been my favorite part of the show. That character.
It was really funny too that the character in the book, Flint, the other
Flint
detective.
Paper, yeah.
That stays next to them.
Yeah, that's something we didn't talk about. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's just the couple times he was in the book, I can't really think how to describe what I liked about it. It was just he was kind of there. It was another part of the background that was just kind of there. They talked to him a couple times, all the times where he was throwing people out of his building or out of his office and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of felt like that almost serious thing of the book. It was bordering on being serious, because in the games that I've played, he was an important character.
Yeah.
They dialogued with him quite a lot,
mm-hmm.
and it was weird seeing him so background in this.
Well, one thing I really like about Flint Paper's character, sorry by the way.
No, that's fine.
I really like how much Sam and Max admire the guy, because he's even more violent than Sam and Max are.
Mm-hmm.
He's intentionally violent.
Yeah.
Sam and Max are accidentally violent.
Yeah.
Well, Flint Paper is a very straightforward parody of the classic pulp detectives,
even in the name too, Flint Paper.
Flint Paper, the character of Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe, those are the classic pulp detectives, and they're all really violent, the joke, of course, in Sam and Max is that he's always beating somebody up in his office, and he's always got some weird random characters in his office. And that's what it is, because all these old detective fictions, they start out, they're meeting weird people, and they always get into fist fights and stuff like that. So that's kind of what he is. That Flint Paper is just a very straightforward
pastiche.
Pastiche parody of those characters. Tough as nails, square jawed.
Right. And like I said, he wasn't there a lot, but the couple times he was there, just kind of.
He's just very memorable. He's just memorable.
Yes, he's very memorable for the little bit of screen time that he had.
Well, it's a good joke, and it also helps to set up the style of the comic, because they're detectives and they call themselves freelance police, which I really like, by the way. That's great. And so they're detectives, and they're in an office building with other detectives, and the one next to them is the classic detective, and he's their buddy, and he's constantly just got bodies lying around his office of people that he beat up. So that just kind of helps to establish the world that they're in. This is
completely kind of almost backwards.
Or the one appearance he had where the courier was delivering a letter or whatever for the next mission, and you just see the window break, and he's just falling through the window, and Flint Paper's behind this guy, and the mailman or the courier or whatever has a knife in his back.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a really funny joke. But like I said, it was weird, because from the little bit I knew of the series, I thought he was more important than he was, and I thought the supporting cast was more important, because in the games the supporting cast is very important. But the book, it knew that it was going to focus on Sam and Max.
One of the things I really like about the book is all the little bits they have in the middle, in between
where
it's the Max paper bag thing, or Fizzball,
the little PSAs that they do.
That's something that can really only be done in a comic like that.
Yeah, specifically, there's a board game.
Exactly, I was just about to say that.
Yeah, those kind of things are great, because I am a huge advocate of reading comics and talking about things that are great about comics that only work in comics, and that is exactly that type of thing. Yeah, when they do those little in between things, the board game or the paper cutouts. When Sam shows how to make the Max hand puppet out of paper bag. Puppet, paper bag puppet. Yeah, that's great. I really liked that.
There was another one of those little in between page things where it's they were asking each other existential questions or whatever.
Oh yeah, that
one
good one
floored me. Well, the couple times it was in the book, just absolutely floored me, because it was you get all these goofy stories of them doing all these hijinks and whatever. It hits that, and it's they're trying to pose existential questions, but in a really goofy Sam and Max type of way. So it's what? That doesn't make sense. What does that question mean? But yeah, I really like those couple things. It was a nice segue into the next story since, we didn't have to worry about the stories leading into one another.
That's like continuity.
Yeah, we didn't have to worry about continuity.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite jokes, the one that absolutely made me laugh the hardest out of the whole book, was the runaway pirate ship.
Oh my god, yeah.
So they're...
That was a great... Let's talk about that,
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I believe they're in L.A. or New Orleans or something.
New Orleans.
Yeah, they're in New Orleans, and everyone's wearing animal masks. And it just cuts away to the next panel, and they had big masks of their heads.
Yeah.
That joke was so good.
That made me laugh so hard.
Yeah.
I absolutely couldn't believe it. In my notes, I've just got it in all caps. I can't believe that they did this.
Yeah. So, like, for most of the comic, they're just wearing big head mask versions of their faces. And so they're drawn with, like, these oversized heads. That's great.
That's the part when their car breaks down, right? And they're like, I don't know, is that when they go to Tijuana or something like that? All I know is that there's this one part in that whole story where they give the car repairman a box of, like, singing Tijuana frogs or something like that.
Yes.
And that made me laugh so hard.
I really enjoyed that story because there was just so many funny... Like, obviously, the whole joke, or the whole book is funny jokes. But that one I can very, very strongly remember laughing the hardest at.
Yeah.
Just all of the different things that were happening, especially the mask part. The mask part, I had to, like, stop for a second because I was laughing so hard.
Yeah, no, the mask, that was a really good joke. I really like the masks.
It's just such a bizarre story. Like, an anthropomorphic dog and bunny who are cops have to go and, like, go on a pirate ship that's not in water.
Yeah.
To, like, save a bunch of manatees.
Yeah, the manatees,
okay.
yeah. I also love the joke that I'm looking at the panel right now, that the pirate ship is being pulled by what is it, a legion of rats and the world's largest prairie dog. So there's just like a bunch of rats and then one huge prairie dog just pulling on the ship. Oh, that's
Another thing that I really liked
I'm looking at that right now.
Right. In so many different contexts, when they were in danger or anything, something just crazy and obscene happened to save them. And in any other context, I would just kind of roll my eyes and go, they had to be saved because of the main characters, blah, blah, blah. But for some reason, it just kind of fits in this because nothing else makes sense.
Yeah.
So, of course, something crazy happened. Like in this story specifically about the pirate ship, how their octopus friends came in and saved them.
Yeah.
I forgot about that, yeah.
Yeah, there's a specific quote when the octopus say, "We'll put our sticky tentacles on you," and most folks hate that. And Max says, or Max does it, and then the pirates go, "No, we hate that."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's so refreshing and great how well these play off each other. Had there not been a cartoon of it, I would have said from the get-go of reading this was made to be a cartoon. Like, this works in a cartoon format, even off the screen, which is, obviously it worked as a cartoon.
Yeah.
So, how many seasons did the cartoon go for?
One.
2?
No, just
one season.
I think it's went for one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't go for more. I think it was a timing thing. 1999 was pretty late for Fox Kids era.
Definitely.
Like once you got into 2000s, that's kind of where like the decline of the Saturday morning cartoons happened.
And stuff like Cartoon Network picked up.
Exactly, yeah, because at that point, that's when all the cartoons were switching to Cartoon Network, and like so you had like Kids WB was becoming a big thing in 2000s, I think around there, and like you said, yeah, with cable and Cartoon Network, it was this year, I believe, was the year that Saturday morning cartoons finally stopped.
Which was a very somber day.
Yeah, so
yes.
I guess it's been like 15 years since the Sam and Max cartoon, but I still feel like the timing of it was poor. Like it really could work as a continuing series. Like it's the kind of thing I think that would actually play really well on Cartoon Network.
See, I think it would be perfect for like Adult Swim. Like,
that's kind of what I was thinking. Like you could go Adult Swim direction with it if you wanted to, but I don't think it has to. If you know what I mean. Like, I think it could have worked really well in like a Toonami setting.
Yeah, kind of like a late night.
Like, or again, like I don't want to get too talky about it. I think it could have worked really well in Cartoon Network's late night block before they did Adult Swim. That's where they stuck their like kind of weird cartoons that they didn't quite have a whole like for adults angle. They weren't trying to sell it like that, but that's when they had like Space Ghost Coast to Coast was on just Cartoon Network at night. And Sam and Max would have fit in really well there, like at that time period before it became like a whole like it's for adults. And they were like they were really in your face about how it's like it's not for kids, it's for adults. I always preferred it better when they weren't saying it's for adults, but adults watched it and got it and were like, oh, this is actually really funny, and like kids can watch it and not really care or get it or miss a lot of the double entendres or the innuendos, but like adults would really clue into it. Like that's what happened with Space Ghost. Like Space Ghost was a cartoon for kids that adults watched, and then they started Adult Swim, and then they canceled Space Ghost.
I really would like to see it if it were to make a animated comeback, I'd like to see it as maybe like a 5 to 10 minute little YouTube shorts or something.
Yeah, they could do really well with something like that too.
Pendleton Ward's getting a lot of success with his Cartoon Hangover thing, so I think it would work in that format too. Just Sam and Max in blah blah blah. This is the episode today.
Yeah, I agree.
But it was interesting, too, going into this, because I didn't know how irrelevant the continuity was. Mm-hmm. I expected the stories to kind of mesh into each other, sort of like a Black Sad thing. Mm-hmm. And whenever it started just, this is a self-contained story, blah, 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 I'm really glad that it didn't have the continuity thing to worry about, because when I listen to and watch Sam and Max, I'm going for the funny dialogue and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I got. So did you, going into this, since you didn't really know much about it, did you have any like preconceived notions?
Well, I knew, like I said, I knew what Sam and Max was. I had read the webcomics, so or I hadn't read all of the webcomics, but I had read some of it before.
You knew enough.
I knew enough about it that I actually like this has actually been on my list of things I need to read. So it was really serendipitous when you were like, oh, we should do Sam and Max, and I said perfect because I need to read it. So here we go.
It was the same thing with me. I wanted to find an excuse to read it, and then when Anthony said that he had it, it just it all kind of clicked together.
Yeah, I mean it's a book that I really like. I really like black and white comics. Like this is definitely a comic that kind of came out of the indie black and white boom of the late 80s. That was if you want to like really get into comic book history, in the 80s, based mostly off of the success, the humongous, impossible to replicate success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There was like a huge boom in independent black and white comics. Like everybody was making black and white comics, and everybody was buying them up because everybody wanted the next Ninja Turtles. And I think that definitely kind of helped this comic. I mean, not to say that like it couldn't or wouldn't have gotten published. I'm just saying like that was definitely the time period was like people were eager for independent black and white comics. And so I'm really happy that Purcell was able to kind of put this out in a very receptive climate and really helped him to kind of keep moving the franchise along. I'm sure he would have kept using Sam and Max regardless of how well the comics did. Like we said, like he was just using them just as characters for whatever he did. When he was working with LucasArts, he was just using them in newsletters
for the point and click adventures.
Well,
and the
and then they turned into a game. So I'm just glad that the comics got made and that there was a time period where it really facilitated.
And it really blew up. Not obviously, like you said, impossible to replicate the TMNT boom. Mm-hmm. It's interesting now that since Sam and Max has kind of, I almost want to say settled down. It's not having the exposure that it used to. He's working at Pixar now. Mm-hmm. Anthony, you said he helped on Brave, right?
Steve Purcell, he co-directed Brave.
Okay.
He is a good man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never saw Brave.
Neither have I.
It slipped under my radar, but I know it had a pretty decent amount of success. It did pretty well.
I saw Brave. It looked really good. I didn't like it's not my favorite Pixar film. But it looked great. I really thought the animation was really well done. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much all I can say about it.
So, like, now that we've found out that Steve Purcell helped or co-directed on Brave, does that make sense? Like, do you see that now? Why I ask that is like Gennady. How do you pronounce his last name?
Tartakovsky.
Yeah.
Gennady Tartakovsky.
When he's involved in Gennady Tartakovsky, when he's involved in something, you can tell. Like it's got his specific flair to it.
Oh yeah, like Star Wars, Clone Wars.
Yeah, and like that upcoming Popeye movie
and Hotel Transylvania.
Yeah, that's him. Like it's unmistakably him. That's why I asked about.
Yeah, Purcell co-directed Brave, and he had some involvement in Ratatouille.
Okay.
Like,
I saw Ratatouille.
He worked as an
Ratatouille was
animator.
great.
I love Ratatouille.
I thought it was great.
Fantastic. Yeah. But I guess Brave was the biggest Pixar thing, like the biggest role he's had in a Pixar project. Because he co-directed it, and according to what I'm reading here, he also provided work for the screenplay. So yeah, sounds like he had a lot to do on Brave. Having read Sam and Max and seen Brave, I saw Brave a few years ago, so I only saw it once. But I really would never have guessed that Purcell had anything to do with Brave.
Like prior to this podcast, I had no idea he was even at Pixar.
Well, reading his bio, I read that he worked at LucasArts, and then that makes sense that he would then move on to Pixar because Pixar started LucasArts. So,
yeah.
But there's some like good comedic timing in Brave for a few stuff. So I mean, obviously lots of talented people worked on the Brave.
Oh, definitely.
Right, of course.
But no, I would not have guessed that Purcell had anything to do with it without being told. I think Brenda Chapman, who was the writer for Brave, and she co-directed, or she was the main writer for Brave. It was her I think it was like her project. She co-directed Brave also. I think it was much more of her project than Purcell, and I don't think there's anybody that would even dispute that. Like I don't even mean like in the promotion for the film, they were very eager to promote the fact that it was written and is being directed by a female.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it had a co-director because everybody was so busy talking about Brenda Chapman directing it. And I don't mean that to sound like negatively. I just mean like they were very clear. They wanted to really highlight the fact that this was her movie, and she, and that's great. I think she does good work. But I definitely think that like Disney, Pixar definitely put more of the limelight and the focus on Brenda Chapman, and I think the audience naturally just reacted to her because it was her movie, like it was her project, and it is a big deal, to have a talented woman who was writing and directing a major studio film. So there's really no reason to talk about Steve Purcell working.
Yeah, right. It's like, hey, he made this comic that no one watching this has ever heard of.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Other than like he did work on it and he gets the credit, but like it's funny because like watching the film and reading the comic, I never would have thought that he had anything to do with it. And what I mean by that is like there certainly wasn't anything in Brave that like made me think of Sam and Max. Or vice
no
versa.
way. Like I can even tell just by like the premise of that movie.
Yeah.
Like
it was primarily just that, tomboyish Disney princess, I guess. So that was another selling point too. Was like, it's not a typical Disney princess,
correct.
Or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, no, that was a selling point. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't the typical Disney princess. Also, she was a redhead. That was a big deal. Well,
yeah. I mean, if there was a scene where the main character just wound up on the moon or in the Philippines, then I could see
or if there was
influence.
Like giant cockroaches just kind of walking around in the background, not doing anything, just there in the background.
Oh, yeah. Kind of like a George Lucas thing.
Yeah.
Like
oh my
the
God.
Brave director's cut.
When we first made Brave, we really wanted giant cockroaches in the background, but we just couldn't afford it. So now with the special edition,
Steve Purcell wanted giant cockroaches in the background, and then the main director said, "No,
oh my God,
we're not going to put."
I just imagine the concept art for that.
I so desperately want the Steve Purcell director's cut of Brave. With
like sequitur humor and cockroaches and rats.
Yeah, exactly. Rats and rabbits everywhere. And
what I would actually love but for Sam and Max to do a Mystery Science Theater commentary.
Oh my God,
that would be awesome.
Oh,
wouldn't that be?
That is $1 million idea. That'll never happen.
Never gonna happen.
Of course.
Just the Sam and Max like destruction.
Film commentary hour.
Yeah, the Sam and Max film commentary hour. Yeah.
But case in point, I am truly glad that that Sam and Max as a character. Now to go back into what we were really talking about.
Right.
I'm so glad that Sam and Max, like I've been saying, are still relevant to this day so many years later, especially without Steve Purcell's involvement. That they're still relevant and still funny along the same premise. They haven't evolved into something that, the original fans can't feel alienated by. They're still funny.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what we could ask for. Like, they are such a perfect fit for those poker night games because it's all dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the characters just talking to one another. So having them, a dialogue-heavy character, to a degree, just fits in that setting. Like, I would have never thought that I wanted to see Sam and Max talking to Brock Sanson from Venture Brothers, but it's stellar.
Yeah.
It works so well. There's so many facets of those characters that mesh well together that I would have never thought.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm seeing it, I realized I did want it the whole time. So, yeah, I'm really glad that Sam and Max still have success to this day, especially after having such a good comic run. Because, from my understanding, this book sold pretty well, didn't it?
I'm not sure.
I don't know 100%.
I think
The version I have was sold on the Telltale store. I just bought it from there.
That is the third republication.
Yeah, it's
been second republication,
third publication, right?
Yeah.
It's been published and republished multiple times by different publishers, but it's something that I'm sure is going to stay in print.
Definitely.
Right. The first publication, or the first republication, sorry, after it went out of print, I looked on eBay. It's selling for pretty high. The second run of the book, and then when Telltale got a hold of it again, that's the one you have, like you said, Anthony, and that's fairly priced. So
I'm not sure if
it's
they even
apparently
sell
a
it
pretty
anymore.
good collector's item too. Yeah,
because I think
either.
Telltale closed their store down, which really sucks.
But yeah, I'm really glad that you liked the book, Aaron. I figured you'd like it enough.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't know what exactly you would think of it. There's a lot there to think about.
Yeah, it's a fun comic. It occupies like a fun little niche in the comic book community.
Absolutely.
There are definitely people, like, when you meet somebody that's a Sam and Max fan, like they are a huge Sam and Max fan. Like it's definitely a comic, like I said, having read a little bit of the webcomic, but just as somebody who's like into comics and like going to comic book conventions and just kind of like paying attention to the industry and fans, you hear about Sam and Max, people talk about it, like fans really like it, and I see it get listed as like a favorite comedy series all the time. So it's it's definitely like a book that's like earned its place in the industry. Yeah, that Sam and Max, good comic.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I forgot, there was one thing I was thinking about talking about was in the cartoon. I was actually really surprised at how much they really took from the comics.
Oh, like the whole Moon
cartoon
episode was almost
they did the whole episode was
frame.
practically a straight adaptation of the story in the comics. Like we talked about, like they took the guns out, but
they took one joke out of from the comic version into the animated version. Like the way they got to the moon in the comic was that they just shoved a bunch of like matches into the back of the exhaust pipe.
Yeah.
I
just
think
like
in the show they just like pressed a button or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They didn't want to encourage kids to
like smoke or whatever. Yeah,
to put matches in the tailpipe of their dad's car.
Right. But yeah, which is a good joke. That's a good joke,
both are pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah, that.
And I mean, they both work in that like goofy, crazy context.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, they're both ridiculous in their own right. They both work.
But yeah, I did enjoy. I thought the cartoon did a good job, really. It really did take a lot from this comic. Like I basically read them and watched them back to back, and
so long.
A lot of the cartoon felt very familiar, just having read the book. Yeah, so that was Sam and Max. I think we've pretty much said everything.
Everything we can say without going into the nitty gritty.
So we all definitely enjoyed Sam and Max. Obviously, Anthony enjoyed it because he is the one who brought it to the podcast. So thank you, Anthony, for for recommending it and bringing it to us.
No problem.
Yeah, so that'll do it for this episode. Thank you everyone for listening. As always, I am Aaron Walther. You can find me on Facebook, Aaron Walther on Facebook. I am also on Twitter at AAWALTHER, AA Walther on Twitter. And you can find the comics that I have written and drawn at newhavencomics.com. You can also find new episodes of the podcast at newhavencomics.com, or you can find new episodes of the podcast at comicdna.podbean.com. Luke, you don't...
You can find me on Facebook.
Yeah, Luke's on Facebook.
Luke Moritz.
Any lonely people really just need to rack up their friend count on Facebook. You can find Luke on there.
That's me. I'm the pod.
And Anthony, why don't you hit us with your YouTube stuff?
All right. Yeah, my channel is Scorpigator Films. Do not add me on Facebook. We have Facebook Scorpigator stuff, I guess. We occasionally post on there.
Was the URL?
The
just
URL
backslash.
Just, I think it's. I don't know what the URL is. I think it's youtube.com/Scorpigator Films. But I don't know. Just
if you just go to YouTube and
just type in Scorpigator Films. You know.
Films. Yeah.
Got some videos. They're all right.
There you go.
Good.
Right.
I had to give them a watch. I actually didn't know. Luke mentioned something about you doing YouTube, but he didn't like show it to me or tell me what you did. So I'll definitely.
I'd save that for this.
Yeah. I'll definitely check it out. So
thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, for being on the show and for bringing us
for having me.
Excellent. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode. Come back next week. We didn't talk about this on the Deadpool podcast in the last episode, but we're starting our new, or did we? Luke, did we talk about?
Yeah, we talked about the new
schedule. So we're doing almost a weekly episode. So this episode is airing a week after the Deadpool episode, and the next. I'm still not used to our schedule, so I don't know when it's going to be airing. It's the next episode. We are going to be talking about another Joe Kelly comic, the one that I mentioned just in the Deadpool comic. I just can't let this go. We are going to be talking about I Kill Giants, which is written by Joe Kelly, and it is illustrated by J.M. Ken Nimura, who is not an American artist, I don't think. But I can't confirm, but he's a very good artist. It's a very good comic, and we are going to have another special guest on that episode, another independent comic book writer by the name of John Parrish. He's a really good guy, and he's really excited to talk about this book. So come back for the next episode, and we're going to have a good time. And I think that about does it, so we will see everybody later.